This is Carol from the First Presbyterian Church, where we have our story hour when we're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, chapter 11, and it's by C.S. Lewis. Okay, let's begin. Aslan is nearer. Edmund, meanwhile, had been having the most disappointing time. When the dwarf had gone to get the sledge ready, he expected that the witch would start being nice to him, as she had been at their last meeting, but she said nothing at all. And when at last Edmund plucked up the courage to say, "Please, your majesty, could I have some Turkish delight?" You, said the witch. "Silence, fool." Then she appeared to change her mind and said, as if she said to herself, "And yet it will not do any good to have a brat fainting on the way," and once more clapped her hands, and another dwarf appeared. "Bring the human creature some food and drink," she said, and the dwarf went away and presently returned, bringing an iron bowl with some water on it and an iron plate with a hunk of bread. He grinned repulsively and set it down on the floor beside Edmund and said, "Turkish delight for the little prince." "Take it." There he is, handing him the cup of water and the stale bread. And speaking of wanting things badly, I do have Freddie here who wants something badly. Let's see if he'll... There is Freddie. Good old Fred. Can't read a story and not have your best friend next to you, can you? And of course, I have a few other dogs and animals around me, which makes me very happy. Anyway, back to the story. "You may be glad enough of it before you taste bread again," said the witch. While they were still chewing away, the first dwarf came back and announced that the sledge was ready, and the white witch rose and went out, ordering Edmund to go with her. The snow was again falling, and as they came into the courtyard, but she took no notice of the snow, and she made Edmund sit beside her on the sledge. But before they drove off, she called to Fenris Rolf, and he came bouncing out like an enormous dog to the side of the sledge. "Take with you the swiftest of your wolves, and go once to the house of the beavers," said the witch, "and kill whatever you find there. If they have already gone, then you make all speed to the stone table, but do not be seen. Wait for me there in hiding. I, meanwhile, must go many miles to the west before I find a place where I can drive across the river. You may overtake these humans before they reach the stone table. You will know what to do with them if they do." "I hear and obey, O Queen," growled the wolf, and immediately he shot away into the snow, into the darkness, as quickly as the horses can gallop. In a few minutes he had called another wolf, and he was at the dam and sniffing at the beaver's house. But of course they found nothing. It was empty. It would have been a dreadful thing if the beavers and the children, if it might have remained fine outside, for the wolves would have then been able to follow their trail. But it had been snowing, and therefore you could not even see their footprints in the snow. Meanwhile, the dwarf whipped up the reindeers, and the witch and Edmund... Guess who that was? The witch, Freddie and Abby. Anyway, let's go back to maybe some quieter times here to my story time today. Meanwhile, the dwarf whipped up the reindeer, and the witch and Edmund drove out under the archway, on the way into the darkness and the cold. This was a terrible journey for Edmund. He had no coat, and before They'd been gone a quarter of an hour. All the front of him was covered with snow. So he soon stopped trying to shake it off, because as quickly as he did that, there was a lot more snow just gathered all over him again, and he was so tired. Soon he was wet to the skin, and oh, he was so miserable. It didn't look like now that the witch intended to make him king. All the things that had said on her behalf, was she really on the right side? It all seemed silly now. He would have given anything to meet the others. Even Peter. The only way to comfort himself now was trying to believe that this whole thing was a dream, and that he might wake up at one moment and it would be over. But they went on and on, hour after hour. It didn't seem like it was a dream. This lasted longer than I could describe, even if I wrote pages and pages and pages about it. But I will skip to the time when the snow stopped, and the morning had come, and they were racing along the daylight, and still they went on and on, with no sound but the everlasting swish of the snow and the crackling of the harness of the reindeer. And at last the witch said, "What have we here? Stop!" And they did. How Edmund hoped they were going to stop for some breakfast. But she had stopped for quite a different reason. A little way off in front of the tree sat a merry party, a squirrel and his wife and their children, a dwarf and a dog, an old dog fox, all sitting on stools around a table. Edmund couldn't quite see what they were eating, but it smelled lovely, and it seemed to be decorated with holly, and he wasn't at all sure he didn't see something that looked like a plum pudding. At the moment when the sledge stopped, the fox, who was obviously the oldest one present at the party, had risen to his feet, holding a glass in his paw, and he was going to say something, but the whole party saw the sledge stopping, and they saw who was in it. At the gaiety of their faces went away. The father squirrel stopped eating with his fork halfway to his mouth, and someone stopped eating with his fork actually in his mouth. The baby squirrels squealed in terror. "What is the meaning of this?" said the White Witch. Nobody answered. "Speak, Barum," she said again, "or do you want my dwarf to find your tongue with a whip? What is it the meaning of this gluttony, this waste, this self-indulgence? Where did you get all these things?" "Please, please, please, your majesty," said the fox, "we forgiven them, and if I might make so bold as to drink to your majesty's good health." "Who gave them to you?" said the witch. Father Christmas," stammered the fox. "What?" roared the witch, springing from the sledge and taking a few strides nearer to terrify the animals. "He has not been here. He cannot have been here. How dare you? Oh, no. Say you have been lying, and you shall be spared and forgiven." At that moment, one of the younger squirrels lost its head completely. He was here," squealed the little squirrel. Edmund saw the witch bite her lips, and the drops of blood appeared on her white cheek. Then she raised her wand. "Oh, don't, oh, please don't," said Edmund. But even while he was shouting, she had waved her wand instantly, and the merry party had been where they were only statue creatures now. One with his stone fork affixed, forever halfway to its mouth, seated around a stone table where there were stone plates and stone plum pudding. As for you, said the witch, giving Edmund a stunning blow on the face as she remounted the sledge, let that teach you a lesson, to be in favor of spies and traitors. Drive on. And Edmund, for the first time in this story, felt sorry for someone other than himself. It seemed so pitiful to think of those little stone figures sitting there all the silent days and all the dark nights, year after year, till the moss grew on them, and at last even their faces crumbled away. Now they were steadily racing on again, and soon Edmund noticed that the snow, which splashed against them as they were rushing, had been wetter than it had been the night before. At the same time, he noticed that he was feeling not so cold. It was also becoming foggier. In fact, every minute it grew foggier and warmer. And the sledge, it was not running nearly as well as it had been running until now. At first he thought it was because the reindeers were tired. But soon he saw that that couldn't be the real reason. The sledge jerked and skidded and kept on jolting, as if it struck against stone. And whoever the dwarfs whipped, however he whipped the poor reindeer, the sledge went slower and slower. There also seemed to be a curious noise all around them, but the noise of their driving, of the jolting of the dwarfs, and the shouting of the reindeer prevented Edmund from hearing exactly what that noise was. And suddenly the sledge struck so fast that it wouldn't go at all. Then when that happened, there was a moment of silence. And in that silence, Edmund could at last listen to the other noise. A strange, sweet, rustling, chattering noise, and yet not so strange, for he knew he had heard it before, if only he could remember where. Then at once he remembered. It was the noise of running water. All around them, throughout the sight, there were streams chattering and mumbling and bubbling and splashing, and even in the distance roaring. And his heart gave a great leap, though he hardly knew why, when he realized that the frost was over. And much nearer, there was a trip, trip, trip from the branches of all the trees. And then as he looked at one of the trees, he saw a quick cloud of snow just slide right off. And for the first time since he entered Narnia, he saw the dark green of the fir trees. But he hadn't time to listen and watch any longer, for the witch said, "Don't sit staring, fool. Get out and help." And of course Edmund had to obey. He stepped out into the snow, but it was really only slush now, and he began helping the dwarf to get the sledge out of the muddy hole it had gotten into. They got it out at the end, but they were quite cruel to the reindeer. "This is no good, Your Majesty," said the dwarf. "We can't. The sledge is in this thaw." "Then we must walk," said the witch. "We shall never overtake them walking," growled the dwarf. "Not with the start they've got." "Are you my counselor, or are you my slave?" "And the witch," said the witch, "do as you're told. Tie the hands of the human creature behind its back, hold on to the end of the rope, take your whip, and cut the harness of the reindeer. They'll find their way home." The dwarf obeyed, and in a few minutes Edmund found himself being forced to walk as fast as he could with his hands tied behind him. He kept on sliding in the slush and the mud and the wet grass, and every time he slipped, the dwarf gave him a curse and something of a flick of the whip, and the witch walked behind them and kept on saying, "Faster, faster." Every moment the patches of the green grew bigger, and the patches of the snow grew smaller. Every moment more and more trees shook off their robes of snow. Soon, wherever you looked, instead of white shapes, you saw dark green firs and white prickly branches of bare oaks and beeches and elms. When the mist turned from white to gold and presently cleared away altogether, shafts of delicious snowlight struck down onto the forest floor, and overhead you could see blue sky between the treetops. Soon there were more wonderful things happening. Coming suddenly around the corner, onto the glade of silver birch, Edwin saw the ground covered in all directions with little yellow flowers. The noise of the water grew louder, and presently they actually crossed a stream. Beyond it they found snowdrops growing everywhere. "Mind your own business," said the dwarf, when he saw that Edmund had turned his head to look at them, and he gave the rope a vicious jerk. But of course it didn't prevent Edmund from seeing. Only 5 minutes later he noticed a dozen crocuses growing around the foot of an old tree, gold and purple and white. Then came a sound even more delicious than the sound of the water. Close beside the path there were flowing birds suddenly chirped with the branches of the trees. It was as answering the chuckle of another bird a little further off, and then, as if it had been a signal, there was a chattering and chirping in every direction, and then a moment of full song, and within 5 minutes the whole wood was ringing with birds and music. Wherever Edmund's eyes turned he saw birds lightening the branches, or sailing overhead, or having their little squalls. "Faster, faster," said the witch. There was no trace of the fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now there were white clouds hurling across it from time to time. In the whole wide glades there were primroses. A light breeze sprang up, which scattered drops of moisture from the swaying branches, and carried cool, delicious scents against the faces of the travelers. The trees began to come fully alive. The birches, the beech trees, all 4 of them delightful, transparent leaves. All the travelers walked under them. The light also became green. A bee buzzed across the path. "This is not a thaw," said the dwarf, suddenly stopped. "This is spring. What are we to do? Our winter has been destroyed, I tell you. This is Aslan's doing." "If either of you mention that name again," said the witch, "he shall instantly be killed." And that ends up chapter 11. Thank you, and have a great week.